Hello, and welcome back to Radio NIGP, where the theme for the month is Leadership, Extra Duties as Assigned. Thank you for joining us. On today's broadcast, you're going to hear from your colleagues about how we as managers take on the responsibility of helping and leading the people we manage. As we navigate things like natural disasters, notable and newsworthy events, change, grief, loss, stress, and mental illness. We as managers and leaders have to continue to lead our teams and help them navigate these real-life adversities that impact not only themselves, us, but also our workplace. So stay tuned, and thank you for spending some time with us. Don't forget, Forum is coming up, and we will be there live. We hope you'll join us. Have a great day, and enjoy the broadcast.
Hi, everybody. This is Tara Acton. I'm here with Dave Nash and Kevin Yin for our Radio NIGP segment, Hot Topics. And today we are going to talk to you about leadership, other duties as assigned. And our focus is going to be on the importance of giving feedback and recognizing when it's appropriate to give feedback. And some of the things that you're going to hear about from us today, we are going to talk through when you officially have the expectation that you're going to give feedback based on a title or a position, but also sometimes you may not have an official role, but you may be expected to give feedback as a subject matter expert or just because you seem to be in a position of authority or understanding. And so we're going to talk through when is it appropriate, how should we be approaching it, how might the person receiving feedback perceive it, and what can we do to kind of manage that process and make sure that it's a good interaction. So I know, Dave, you have some stories and some thoughts to share.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. And I hearken back to my days in the military. About halfway through my career, I applied for and was accepted and promoted as a warrant officer in the logistics field. And early on in my first assignment after that in an engineer battalion, I working with this particular colonel, I sort of had an epiphany that going forward, my boss would always receive my best appraisal of a situation and the good and the bad and the ugly and a recommendation on how to move forward. And like Tara said, sometimes we're not necessarily in an official position, but we have expertise within us. And I always felt like if I knew enough about something, and that also includes correcting bad information that gets put out sometimes, is you got to stop that in the bud, because next thing you know, it's going off in the agency or in the unit that you're in the military. The other thing was some supervisors over the years, would say something in a meet, like in a staff meeting, like they wanted to cut a department user off at the knees for bad P-card behavior or something like that. And they'd get up to leave, and I'd grab their arm and point at the chair, sit back down here a second, and I'd close the door. And I'd say, you can't do that. I know in the heat of the moment, that's what you feel like doing. But here's what's going to happen if you do that. And 9 times out of 10, they said, yeah, I know. And I always got accused of taking the moral high road. But and which brings me to the point we were talking about earlier about if you're going to say something to somebody that may be construed as critical or bad feedback or something like that, I think it's always a good idea to consider doing it in private. We hear this expression, praise publicly and criticize or discipline privately, because you don't want to embarrass somebody in front of their peers, and you don't want to look like you're challenging a supervisor. So, Kevin, what's your take on this whole thing?
So I just want to discuss that even as leaders, we falter. I mean, we're all human beings and just trying to do our best, do our job right. And sometimes we forget where we are in terms of our role in a meeting, and I have faltered now and then in terms of saying things where I shouldn't have, and then regret it afterwards, or realize it during the conversations. And it's usually when we're in a team meeting or a group discussion, it gets hot and heavy, everyone is sharing, and then you're just blurting something out that's not intended as a critical or a negative feedback, or sometimes it might be a negative feedback, but you're saying it because you're among family and friends, and where that's where I have to watch my voice, because it carries weight that normally it wouldn't, when it's coming from, let's say, a peer, and I forget that sometimes because we're human, and I want to be one of the team members and carry conversation like everyone else, but I know that I can't do that, given my position, and I have done that where someone blurts out. So for me, like, there's certain words that are trigger words that just kind of, when someone says it, like irregardless, right? There's no such word as irregardless, but I know people have used it in many different ways, and that's one of those words that just kind of gets me, like, it gives you a twang in the back of your head. Your brain just kind of, but and then you get into the conversation, you make that correction. Of course, that's aiming it at someone that just made that comment, and so I've done that, and then I realized that I've just made a negative, or a critique, of someone's speaking, and I would catch myself. I'll stop, apologize, right, and then and my practice is that then I'll apologize to the person that was impacted by that comment, afterwards, and then I usually will follow up with an email just to everybody, just to make sure that, hey, I understand that there was something said. Here's the impact, and apologize for that. So I don't know. It's just one of those things that I do. In my, I don't know, 15 years of being a leader, it happens.
Yeah, but at least you had
sometimes
the decency, or the know it, to know in the moment that you needed to correct that situation.
Yeah, and I wish that folks would actually see that for what it is sometimes, and then not take it so personally. And even with the apologies, they sometimes still will not acknowledge that somehow that was such a detriment that it impacted them so badly. And I feel bad about that, but
I think it's interesting because, Kevin, I think that speaks to the voice. And I know when you mentioned it earlier, like, as a director, whether you want it to or not, the feedback that you give is going to be taken more seriously, even if you're doing it in a casual setting. That's one piece of it. But even, like, as somebody who's a peer, sometimes we share things, and our heart behind why we share it with them is because we think we're with friends or family, or we think that we want people to be better. So you think that, hey, that's going to be received well. Sometimes it's not. And so I think a huge piece of feedback and being able to take feedback and give feedback is being able to have a little bit of humility if we mess it up. Nothing feels worse than messing it up and seeing somebody start to shut down in front of you. And I think that happens no matter what perspective you're coming from. If you're coaching someone that is a professional peer, but they didn't ask for your feedback, sometimes it's taken differently. And so I think having that awareness, but hoping that you have that emotionally vulnerable, safe space to be able to say, I messed this up. I hope you understand my heart behind why I shared what I shared. And in the future, I'll either directly seek your permission to provide the feedback, or something along those lines, when we don't have a purpose, a reason for giving feedback. Because I don't think anyone does it wanting to tear someone down, but sometimes that happens. I don't know. I just think it's an interesting dynamic. one of the other things, and I know we're probably getting close on time, but there is a risk to not sharing feedback.
There is.
I think you talked about it a little bit, Dave. Like, you decided that they would get your unbiased opinion. Here's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Not providing that information could be detrimental to your organization.
Exactly.
I think it's the same with coaching people. So there is a risk in not stepping out and sharing feedback, even if it would be uncomfortable feedback. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that before we wrap up, or.
No, I think it's important to do that. And one other thing I want to close with here is something that happened to me when I was fresh out of high school working in a machine shop. I messed up a project that I was working on, and the supervisor came over. He was really upset, and he turned around and he said, "Well, that's what you get for sending a boy to do a man's job," because I was just 18. And man, talk about cutting somebody down. And the next morning, I'm standing there at my station, and he came out of the supervisor's office and made a beeline for me. And right there on the shop floor in front of everybody, he apologized to me for what he'd said the day before. And, that was over 50 years ago, and I have not forgotten that. And I think it's important that leaders, we realize that we do make mistakes, like Kevin said. And, we have an obligation to apologize to that person. And I shouldn't have said that. I was, in the heat of the moment, whatever. And I'm truly sorry for belittling you like that. So anyway, yeah.
I feel like that's important, but I also feel like the other side of that coin, and Kevin, I think you touched on it a little, is we can't continue to beat ourselves up for it. Some people may not recover. Some people are going to continue to think that it was a personal attack. I think we have to do our best to acknowledge it. And the example you gave, Kevin, of emailing everybody and saying what I shared in this meeting came across differently than I wanted it to. That was not my intent. You've done everything you can, because we are expected to give feedback. And sometimes we have to have critical conversations and people's feelings will get hurt. So I think give yourself a little bit of grace too, and realize that you've done everything that you can to correct it. Words once said can't be unsaid. And we all know that. And that's the part that's painful about it. But if you've done everything that you can to acknowledge that you made a mistake, then I think you just have to move on and live with it, because the reality is the feedback you gave wasn't inaccurate. The way you gave it maybe hurt someone's feelings. You did
That's right.
To correct that.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Well, I mean, if we have nothing else to share, of course, I always love discussing these things with you guys, and we could probably talk for another 20 minutes about that. And maybe in the future we will, but thank you guys for listening to us. And we look forward to chatting with you all again at a future episode of Radio NIGP.
Hi there, I'm Christy Barta. You may recognize me from Tech Talk or Construction Junction. However, today I am bringing you a message from the NIGP Member Council about a couple of events coming up to help you prepare for Forum. On August 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern, there will be a webinar for the in-person Forum attendees offering the top 10 tips for attending Forum in person in Louisville. These tips include suggestions on what to pack, how to pick which sessions to attend, and of course, all the networking opportunities for in-person attendees. Then on August 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern is the webinar offering the top 10 tips for those attending Forum during the virtual streaming events. These tips include how to prepare your schedule to attend the virtual sessions, what to have in your office to help keep you focused on the events, and of course, suggestions on networking with your peers. The Member Council looks forward to seeing many of you at these webinars and at Forum. Thank you and have a great day.
On May 31st, 2019, we all watched in the news as Virginia Beach suffered a mass shooting. Among the people that were involved were my dear friend Rebecca Key, who's here to talk to us today. Not necessarily about that experience, but just about what she learned from the experience. Also here today to talk to us about that is my friend Sandy Boone, who is owner of Foothold Counseling here in South Carolina. You all have seen her before as she presented with me at VCon, and hopefully we'll see her again pretty soon in some spaces. I just wanted to talk about, ladies, just a discussion. Okay, nothing really formal, just a discussion, and basically what today's or this month's episode about is other duties as assigned and basically leading our teams through trauma or traumatic events. And so, Rebecca, that's why I have you here, because I wanted to talk about what was it that you learned in your leadership style and in how you managed the situation in the days following that May 31st event.
Sure. I think, Stacy, the biggest thing I learned was that I thought being a manager to my staff was protecting them. And so I took on anything that had to do with that from a work perspective, anything that had to do with that event, I took on, and I kept them in the dark. I didn't just do it. I didn't allow them to help. I didn't allow them to know that things were happening because I didn't want to hurt them further. But sometimes getting back to work, sometimes picking up the pieces is actually helpful. And I took that healing opportunity from my staff by feeling like I was protecting them from that piece. And we talked about that as individuals. I don't know what that looks like from a professional counseling standpoint, but it certainly would have been helpful to some of my staff to participate.
Yeah, that trauma happens like the moment we realize we don't have control. And so when I see clients in the office with trauma, I try to give them as much control as possible. Some clients need to tell their story. Some clients do not want to tell their story. And so really finding that balance and individualizing that as much as I possibly can so that they do have control. So to what you're speaking of, Rebecca, like having a conversation of there's stuff that needs to be done. Do you need to do this or would you rather not?
I think it's a good point. And I think maybe we need to back up a little bit and talk about how trauma is not always going to be a mass shooting, right? That's not the way that's going to show up every single time. It could be anything. And so what we've heard on the broadcast so far today is what happens if a hurricane comes through Florida, or what happens if you lose a member of your team to death. So how do we as managers and leaders actually deal with that? Any insight from either one of you two?
Sure, I'll take that one first. So I think that was a good point. And I heard Sandy say, people want to feel in control, but that may be talking about it, that may not be talking about it. That was another big point we found. We had a pretty big team. We had almost 30 people just in the procurement office doing various things. Some were there that day, some were not. Some were a major part of the team and had been with the city a long time. Some were new. Some were interns. And so because of everybody's different role and everybody's different experience that day, because it was vastly different, even when we're in the room today, the same day on that day, the perception is different. The past is different. Some people had already had previous violent trauma that, they hadn't shared in the office, right? So you never know how people are going to take things. You never know how they're impacted. So not only is the trauma potentially happening to one or two people and not the entire office, but even when it happens to the entire office, the experience is extremely different, and therefore the reaction is extremely different. And so deciding that you understand how someone else feels is impossible, but also trying to, and we engaged professional help to counsel us as a team. Like, people had availability to go get whatever therapy and counseling they needed, but we also had a team approach where everybody sat down together who felt comfortable to talk about how different people can react and what different people need in those times, and how to be kind and understanding with each other. Because our assumption, and mine included, would be, I wouldn't want to do this, let me protect you. Well, that wasn't everybody's need. You should be over this by now. I am. It's not that big a deal. We're physically fine. So different people react in different ways, and some people decide how you should feel to protect themselves based on how they feel. So it's such a difference. It can really tear your team apart. So having that professional come in and intervene and say everybody handles trauma differently. And I also learned, real quick to make this 2 points, people come up to me all the time and tell me that they didn't go through anything like what I went through, but they had trauma. And I'll defer to Sandy on this one, but my understanding is that the physical reaction to that trauma is often very similar. So it doesn't matter if it was a mass shooting or somebody in your office that you had only worked with for 2 months passes away. If you have that trauma and that feeling, the physical piece that you go through, which we don't talk about for mental health so much, is very similar, if not the same, is what I'm understanding, Sandy.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. I'll have clients, I do a lot of attachment trauma and relationship trauma, like emotional trauma as a childhood or emotional neglect. And, people are saying it really wasn't that big of a deal. I wasn't assaulted, or I wasn't in a mass shooting, or I was fill in the blank. And I tell people, this isn't trauma Olympics. We don't have a winner here, and we don't get to decide how we respond to trauma or how we don't respond to trauma. That really does go back into an innate reptilian brain thing. Like, we don't decide. And so really in my office, I do find that treating the emotional childhood trauma or emotional neglect is often much more challenging than treating I wouldn't say a mass shooting, because that one is really bad, but treating like a sexual assault, or treating like that emotional aspect can be much worse than the physical stuff. Because like our brains, if something physical happens, I'm in a car accident and I break my leg, my brain sees, my eyes see, my brain sees, my leg heals. Mm-hmm. So my brain gets the message that time has passed. I'm getting better. Emotional stuff doesn't work that way. And like in a shooting situation, a mass shooting, you got physical trauma, you got emotional trauma, you may have a neglect situation if things weren't handled the way they should have been handled. Trauma it's not trauma Olympics. It can just magnify.
So as we're wrapping it up, ladies, I'm just going to ask you for a bright spot to end this segment on. So what do you have, Rebecca? What's a bright spot?
Oh gosh, nobody ever asked that question, Stacey. All right, good question. One, I'm here. I have the ability to help others. And two, I am much more, obviously have a much better ability to empathize with folks that are going through something, but also the ability to appreciate things I really took for granted. I know that's a little cliche, but really, really true. You can get through it.
That's awesome. Sandy, what say you?
For me, people that have been through major trauma or even not so major trauma, you have survived 100% of the worst days of your life. And the resiliency is there. Lean on those people that love you. Let them love you well. Because that's relationship is what heals.
So my bright spot is something that Rebecca said earlier in our chit chat, in that our family in the procurement world really comes together for you whenever you have something going on. And that's something that I've had, I don't know if I'm going to call it a pleasure or a displeasure to experience personally. But it's nice to know that, and it's nice to be a part of that. And it's been a nice afternoon chatting with you all, spending my lunchtime with you ladies. And I'm so grateful for this moment that we got to spend together. Thank you all.
Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me on chapter updates this month. A penny for your thoughts. Leading through adversity and other duties is assigned. Does that happen in chapter leadership? Of course it does. Being a chapter leader is no different than leadership in all other aspects of life. You may have members who fall in hard times and need your support, both emotionally and sometimes financially. You have members who have opportunities or challenges that cause them to step back or step fully away from the chapter, leaving a gap that others must fill. As leaders, how do we manage meeting the needs of our members and our chapter in times like these? I'm really happy to share with you conversations with 4 seasoned chapter leaders this month. One who will share with us how her chapter assists their members who are having personal struggles, and 3 others who share their experiences of the extra duties we take on in chapters to fill those gaps during times of transitions. Before we talk to them, though, let me offer a quick invite. I hope to see a lot of you in Louisville next month at NIGP Forum. Please stop me and say hi if you see me there. I would love to talk to you about your forum experience.
Hello, I'm Tabitha Friedman with the Central Florida chapter of NIGP. I am the current president, and this is about leadership and some of the things and some of the programs we have to assist our members. The Central Florida chapter has a Sunshine Fund. This fund is reserved to assist chapter members and their immediate family members in the event of hospitalization or death. The Sunshine Fund also assists members facing personal hardships. It also can be used to purchase flowers, gift cards, etc. when the chapter wants to acknowledge illness, death, birth, hospitalization, etc. So each year, the Central Florida chapter puts away $500 in a budget line for this Sunshine Fund. The president will make the decisions to provide the assistance and will report back to the board on any fund disbursements. That's how our bylaws read. However, I do want to clarify that our chapter is very open, so we tend to have meetings with all the board members and discuss any decisions together before we disperse funds. But in the interest of member privacy, the board may choose to keep those names of the members or their family confidential. Also, we have by majority vote of the board of directors. The member's scholarship fund may be dispersed to the member as a Sunshine Fund disbursement if we, the board, determines it to be sufficient hardship. Now, scholarship funds are based on attendance and activities and engagement by a member through the chapter, and it's a long process of lots of things they can get. But we have not, to my knowledge, in the last few years, done anything regarding a membership scholarship fund. However, I can say that the board has dispersed some Sunshine Funds over the last few years to some of our members based on hospitalization, based on a tragedy hitting a family, and we try to be really considerate of some of our members' needs. And we do like to give back and acknowledge that sometimes people need our support.
Tabitha, that's a great program that you all have.
I'm very pleased that we're able to offer this assistance, and we wish it could be more sometimes.
Just out of curiosity, do you know how that came to be? Has that been in place for several years, or?
It has been in place for many years. I mean, I've been involved in the chapter since 2014, and yeah, it's been in place since then.
That's great.
Over the years, we've provided flowers for people, just showing our warmth towards their hardships.
That's good.
Well.
And that's being in the leadership role in the chapters, it's not just professional development. Sometimes you have members that are in need, emotionally or otherwise, and that's great that you all can help support them.
Yes. Thank you so much, Penny.
Thank you, Tabitha. So for this piece of the segment, I wanted to talk to some leaders in the chapters about stepping up and having to jump back in after being in leadership roles for several years. With us today, we have three of our Tennessee leaders who have been in the chapter leadership roles for several years. Dustin, will you introduce yourself first?
Yes, I'm Dustin Sharon. I'm the president of TAP this year, and I am the purchasing agent for Johnson County, Tennessee.
Lynn?
I'm Lynn Farnham, and I am the purchasing agent for Rome County, Tennessee, and I have been the treasurer for 16 years and then wound up being the president for this year.
Lori?
I'm Lori Bryant. I'm the purchasing director for the Clarksville Montgomery County School System and am currently serving TAP as the Pro D chair, and in the past have been the comm chair, the communications chair, and webmaster. I've been a past president and vice president and treasurer, and have served a number of different roles, and also currently serve on the member council as part for NIGP.
How do we set boundaries when that comes back around? So this has happened in both chapters, actually, this past year. As I mentioned, last year, TAP lost two presidents. Dustin, this year you were vice president and our president left in TAP, and so you have stepped up. So how do we set boundaries when these things happen? Lori, you want to start?
Well, as I mentioned, I was webmaster for, and still am sort of, for a number of years, since about 2013. The year I served as president or vice president, and so a lot of institutional knowledge comes with being the webmaster. So the current presidents turn to you for the answers to questions and how do we handle this and how do we handle that. So this year I kind of had to say I need to take a step back. I've got a lot going on at my work, and hand off the comm chair, communications chair duties, which include webmaster, to somebody else. I'm still available to help if somebody needs it, but they have to call and not expect me to be the one that's doing it. So yeah, Pro D chair doesn't take quite as much time as comm chair did. So I'm able to. I had to set that boundary this year just to say I'm not able to do what I have been doing.
Right. Lynn, you want to talk about setting those boundaries and how do you manage all that work as well?
I'm not really good at setting boundaries. I'm one of those people that like to be in the mix, and I want to be involved, and so I have a hard time saying no, especially when those very dear friends that are, one of which is on this panel, said it's time that you take your turn as East Tennessee Purchasing Association president. Thank you, Penny. But it has really, being the treasurer for so many years, it's just kind of part of my day. It's just what I do, and it all does kind of roll down here in my office to my staff, some of it, but I really can't talk a lot about setting those boundaries because I'm just not very good at it.
Dustin, how about you?
So recently I had offered to help Penny be part of one of the webmasters for ETPA. And because I saw that, from my perspective, that, I could offer some assistance there. I could help relieve maybe some of the pressure. I could learn some of that. If Penny couldn't get to it, then maybe I could. Because more hands are better than one. And, I became vice president for TAP. And then very, very quickly, was thrust into the president's position because our president had to step down. So I did have to, unfortunately, relinquish that fairly new responsibility of being the second webmaster for ETPA because of time. And on a personal level, I have a lot of other things going on as well. And I'm like Lynn. It's hard for me to say no. We live here in the volunteer state, and I always go back to that. But there's only so much time in a day. But you do have to try to set some boundaries in some capacity.
Yeah, I think all four of us on this call are kind of guilty of that difficulty to say no sometimes, but it does become a necessity at times. And I'm like, so, I juggle a lot of it. My staff gets a little of it now. I'm like, hey, we're doing a trade show. Reach out to some people. Here, run this report for me. And so I'm teaching more people how to do what we know to do with the website and things like that. So now I guess my last question kind of is our why. Why do we do it? So Lynn, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, we do it because we love it. And our organizations, TAP and ETPA, has been a part of my life. I've been in public procurement for almost 30 years. And TAP and ETPA has been there a lot of those years for me. And we want to make it succeed. We want to make it grow. And as we've talked a little bit earlier, sometimes it's not looking, we don't have that youth coming in and wanting to be involved. So it does lay on us kind of as the older folks doing a lot of the work, but we do it because we love it.
Dustin, would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. And it's crazy to think that here I am. I've been in procurement for 10 years now, and I'm considered one of the older guys now. It just seems like yesterday when I first joined the associations. But I love what I do. TAP and both ETPA as well have given me vast knowledge and friendships and the ability to move forward with my career. And it's just one of those things that I see the value in it. And if I can do something to help, I just want to. And that's just kind of part of it.
Lori, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, and I think from my position, I came in as vice president the year we started a new website, which is the reason I wound up being the webmaster, because I got trained on it and then it fell to me. But there's also I think a lot of us are perfectionists about things and we want to see things done well and done right. And so when things come up and we say, oh, the chapter we need to turn in this report, or we need to apply for this award, or this, the chapter seal awards that come up every year. I've filled those out for the last few years. And this year I was like, I need somebody else to do this here. Don't forget it's due this day. And this is what we've done in the past. And here's where you send it. And hoping that the next people in line will learn to do these things and learn to do them well, so that we continue to have that sense of excellence in TAP and continue to grow.
Well, thank you all three. I think that you shared a lot of knowledge about how we have these other duties in the websites. And I can say from the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate everything you all do. I know our chapters appreciate what you do, and I just can't imagine what we would do without you. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to Tech Talk for July. This month's topic is leadership, other duties as assigned. Last year, nearly 300 attacks against U.S. organizations were recorded by TechTarget's editorial 2022 ransomware database. So thinking about procurement and the ransomware attacks that may hit public entities, I've asked my friend Stephanie to come to give me some ideas and to remind me about all those other duties as assigned that we get when something like this happens. So Stephanie, ransomware attack, our system's has been shut down. What do we do?
Christy, think about this. Where does any entity go the minute that something goes wrong with anything that they own or that they've bought? They show up in procurement, right? Like they always show up in procurement. And it's definitely an other duty as assigned, because while we're attempting to negotiate these contracts, we're always thinking about the risk. And I know that you know that. We've talked about this many times. There's at least, 15 different areas of risk that we look at. And we're looking at it in addition to having maybe the chief information officer look at it, or having the chief security officer looking at it. So we're always thinking about that risk in advance. So if I'm attacked, the first place I'm going is back to my contract.
Okay.
Do I have any way to avail myself of any relief from the contract terms and conditions?
Restitution.
Right. Absolutely. That's the first place I'm going.
So the second thing we need to do, though, is keep what our current process is going. So obviously we can't use the computers we have. So hopefully our backed up system or our disaster recovery system is on a separate, not networked piece of hardware. And we can then do what?
So it really depends. There's a lot of ways that entities can deal with this. And some of the ways, again, are having a disaster recovery site data that is not kept in the same place as the active data, right? So the disaster recovery site.
Like
a lot
our
of
sandboxes.
entities, right. And a lot of entities choose to do that by having what's called a hybrid environment. And hybrid environment is, a cloud environment and any other environment, right? So some hybrid environments consist of not only cloud, but having data stored back to your own environment or into your own server farm at the end of the day, right? So at the end of the day, all your data comes encrypted and is left in your environment. But then your environment, again, is closed. And the next day you work in the cloud and all the data comes, so that you have this constant feed and flow.
Right.
So mostly that's very costly. So, and it's also a risk to the SaaS provider. So they're a little bit reluctant to do it. However, you either have disaster recovery or you have your hybrid environment. So you're going to have some sort of environment that you can go back to and start to rebuild, because that's the first thing you're going to need to do is absolutely rebuild your environment right away, or at least get started on that effort.
So I know we've talked about it. So, we're going to rebuild our environment. So we may have a little bit of loss of data in between when the malware hit and when we actually get up and going. But, most of us, we can figure that out. Heck, I think some people still have some old hard copy paper POs sitting back there that they can use in dire emergencies when we go back to the Stone Age. But the biggest thing we can use, obviously, is a continuity of operations plan, or as you like to call it, a COOP. So we have that in place, so we know exactly what to do, what things we need to do. Okay, this has happened, this trigger point has happened, then we go to this, then we go to this. And that is all how we have other duties as assigned, is by knowing that there's things that we're going to have to do to put in place to keep that continuity plan active, so that we can recover and get operations up and going as quickly as possible after an attack.
Absolutely. I mean, without a continuity of operation plan, you don't know what your fails are, or where your threat is. And so or what the risk is, or what the highest risk is. And so doing that plan really lays out not only for the entity, but for procurement. Where do I need to start having backup contracts, readily available contracts, things that I can actually get my hands on right away in the event of this failure? Some entities prefer to have it on site. Some, like backup, like an extra store of laptops, for example.
Right.
Some prefer to have a vendor have that and hold it for them
Right.
in that event. It's again, I think that's an entity decision that gets made, but looking at that continuity of operation plan helps you figure out, oh, okay, I'm going to need to get my hands on, cabling. I'm going to need to get my hands on laptops. I'm going to need to get my hands on, like paper POs. I'm going to need to be able to communicate, with certain vendors via, phone, as opposed to, sending them emails if I don't have that ability. So, can I place orders on my P card as opposed to having to issue POs? So also, it is so imperative to have consultants in place to help you get yourself back up and running. Because as you can imagine, there's going to be and I don't want to say a panic, but for lack of a better word, there's going to be a panic. And people are going to want to figure out very quickly how to react and what that reaction is going to be. And again, as procurement professionals who deal in IT, we have to try and mitigate the risk on the front end, and other duties as assigned, look at that coup plan and know where we need to have contracts readily available on the back end.
Exactly. So as you said earlier, the threat is real, our weaknesses are real. And we just want to thank everybody for tuning in to this episode of Tech Talk. And we hope to see you again soon on Radio NIGP.
Thanks.
Hello and welcome to Radio NIGP. My name is Bobby Tolston, and I'm here today as your host for Deeper Dive, Making a Splash. Joining me today is Kate Rotella, one of my colleagues that I am so pleased to have here with me today. Today, our topic is leadership and other duties as assigned. We're going to focus our segment on ERP. Some of you have probably heard the acronym before, but maybe you're not familiar with what it stands for. So ERP is an acronym for Enterprise Resource Planning, and it is a system that is installed as software as a way of enhancing your business processes. Sometimes included in those enhancements are finance, purchasing, inventory, accounts payable, and there could be other modules added as you go along. So Kate, we're going to talk today about implementing ERP systems and lessons learned. So based upon your experience, can we start out talking about the planning process?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So you're right. An ERP system spans many different genres inside of your particular business, right? It's not just purchasing, but it's finance, it's HR, accounting, inventory, which could also be in your warehouse and facilities area, asset management. There's a lot of different things that goes into that. And the first thing is planning. And I would say to you that planning to do the larger ERP system that crosses all those different disciplines probably takes a year, if not more. You have to get everybody involved. So that means a lot of meetings. That means not just meeting with your staff, and the staff in the finance office, which may be located very closely to you, but you're going to have to go out to other areas, especially if there's inventory, warehouse management, asset tracking in those, and it involves all those people. You need to make sure that you plan and you meet. And we started with one large meeting with everybody there talking about different systems. Now, I would say to you, having things be successful, we've all rolled out software, right?
Yeah.
And projects that people don't necessarily like change. So my experience has been,
it's important to bring people in while you're even selecting systems. Have them be part of that process. Have them give you input. Have them be there for the interviews, hearing how those systems are selected or what those systems offer. Let them have a voice. I find when people have a voice,
Yes.
these sorts of lifts are much easier.
Yes, Kate, thank you for that. And I could not agree with you more. I've had the fortune of implementing 2 successful ERP systems, and I began a third at my current with my current employer. But I can tell you, if you do not bring the right people in at the right time, you've already set your implementation up for failure, because they will not come on board when you're halfway down the road if you did not consider to bring them in the beginning. So finding out who those resources are, and I found that it's not a bad thing to bring in more people than less, right? If you think that someone needs to be there, invite them and allow them the opportunity to say yay or nay, but we can always say we asked you, right? For your
That's
input.
right.
And that is so important. So let's talk about a little bit more. Let's take a deeper dive into developing that project team. What does that look like, Kate?
Yeah, so for me, the project team, and I've done a couple of these systems, running these systems out, but also I've done, when we talk about the larger system, in there are other systems, right? So there's a purchasing system, and I think it's important to identify that those are in the bigger ERP systems. Now, that doesn't mean that that's where you use that system. It may be that you have a purchasing system in your larger ERP system, but you also are implementing a bidding and e-procurement system, which has to interchange with that. The same thing with asset management or inventory. They may also use a different system that has to integrate with this larger ERP system. So I think it's really important to talk about identifying those people, like you said, and who you bring to the team. But to start in the beginning, I think larger, you bring people in and you let them know that they're part of it, because as we said, they want to have a say in it. And then you have to get a core group of people together, right? So who's going to be the team lead for each area when you're doing a larger ERP system? Who's going to be the team lead for accounting, for finance, for purchasing, for HR, for inventory, for the person who's doing the facilities, maybe their asset tagging, IT. And let's not forget our friends in IT, right?
Yes.
They have to come through also. And you may need more than one person in IT because, as we know, IT can tend to be a little siloed, right? Somebody handles the software, somebody handles the hardware, and then somebody handles the questions. So I think it's really important to identify those leaders from those teams.
Yes, I agree 100%. I also found that in implementing ERP systems, you need a champion. You need people that are at the highest level of the organization to support this. Tell me a little bit about your experience. How important are those executive leaders to successful implementation?
So that is huge, right? That is huge. And in addition to needing the champion, you need the backup from the executive leaders, because as we talked about, right? Some people are going to complain. They really are. And you need those leaders to feel like the investment we're making is really worth it, right? We want them to, when people come to them, if they say anything, they're excited about it. They understand it. I think it's really important to have them understand the system. But I also think when you're talking about having a champion, besides having your executive leaders, I think it's good to have someone maybe in your initial meeting that maybe be from the outside that's used the system successfully, an actual user. I think it's good if you have the ability to go out and visit someone who's using it real time. I think that's really key. But I think bringing somebody in who's used the system is also key, right? Hear
Yes.
from them and set expectations. Tell people, look, we know there's going to be bumps in the road.
Yes.
And don't feel, I think in purchasing, we take on a lot of responsibility. And when something goes wrong, no matter what area it is, we fix it. That's what we do. And so I think it's really important for us to recognize that if it's not our fault if something goes wrong, we're going to fix it. We're going to work with people and we're going to fix it. Right. And you need to have a good relationship with that executive leader so that they trust you and they trust that they know you're going to fix whatever may or may not go wrong.
Absolutely. Thank you. So there are other phases that are involved, and I'll mention those. Internal and external communications, very important. You've got to talk to all of the stakeholders, not only the ones that are inside of your organization, but this is a huge investment for your community. So you want to make sure that you get your community involved in multiple ways of communicating, because that also contributes to the success. There's a procurement process that you need to go through in order to finalize everything. And we as procurement professionals, we're typically leading that charge. So we're involved from the beginning with developing the specifications, going through the procurement process. We may also be part of the evaluation team, because if you're implementing a procurement module, we'll have to have our subject matter experts. And as leaders of our departments, typically that's us, right?
Yeah.
And we still have to make sure that the rest of the work is getting done with our team. So when we talk about leadership and extra duties, implementing the ERP system, I think, is the number one thing on the list when it comes to extra duties. You mentioned that just the planning process was a year. So for those of you who are considering implementing the ERP system, keep in mind that there are 5 things that I want you to leave with. Planning is very important, which means bringing on the proper stakeholders in the beginning. You want to make sure that you're communicating up and down the chain and outside of your organization. And you want to make sure that you have executive leadership and sponsorship to make sure that the program has that support and everyone knows that this is a priority for the organization. And it's going to cost you a lot of money, both for the system and for the extra resources that you need. So a lot of organizations stick with their old systems because they do not have the money to invest in a system of that size. So before we leave, Kate, what can you share with our audience?
So I would say, again, planning, just like you said, developing a great team to roll it out. The procurement process, and I think in the procurement process, we would lead that in procurement, but additionally bring some of those team members on, some of those areas on. I think that's really important to have them feel invested.
Yes.
The process is long and it's going to have bumps in it, and prepare yourself for those bumps, but it will be great in the end. It honestly will be great in the end.
Yes, and I echo that. It was painful, but I left a legacy. So did you, because they don't change systems often, so they'll be around.
No, they don't.
To retire. So, Kate, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, RadioNIGP, for listening, and we look forward to seeing you back here again real soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello, and welcome to Way to Grow, an NIGP mentorship moment. Oftentimes we try to do something on our own, and while we're normally able to accomplish the task at hand, having another person along for the ride can really make the journey to the goal so much more meaningful. And a lot of times, more often than not, a lot of fun. I recently learned of 2 individuals who found each other when they both joined a study group and were there for each other as they both took the CPPB and the NIGP CPP exams, I'll say in both cases successfully. But it didn't stop there. Through the encouragement of a single mentor, both of these individuals found greater success. And I'm going to let them tell their story. So first of all, let me introduce everybody to, first of all, meet Tanya Parker, the talkative one, and Michelle Bentley, the quiet one who listens and takes it all in, partnered together to reach a mutual success. So Tanya and Michelle, welcome to Way to Grow.
Thank you, Keith. Thanks for having us.
Okay. Tanya, I'm going to ask you first, since you do say you're the talkative one. Can you briefly tell us how you two became the dynamic duo that you are today?
Out of failure, I failed the CPPB exam, and then I met Michelle through a wonderful study group with Chris Coghill. She joined us together through the study group, and then we began a partnership, which is a lifetime journey of studying for exams and now continuing to grow with NIGP.
Well, you're definitely not a failure, because you took an opportunity and ran with it, and that to me is certainly a sign of a successful person. So, Michelle, how did you two assist each other in reaching your goals?
Well, I reached out to Tanya and asked her if she would be interested in getting together outside of our study group. So we began meeting about once a week. We would meet virtually, talk and go over study questions, just talk about different topics, and just provide each other the support we needed. We met 2 or 3 times closer to the exam date. And then there were times I would feel myself starting to panic as the date grew closer, and I would call Tanya and she would ground me and say, calm down, you know this, we've gone over this a million times, you're going to do fine. And I really could not have done it without her.
That self-encouragement, that mutual encouragement was really helpful for both of you, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, our polar opposite personalities really complemented each other.
How so?
Because I would continue to be a chatterbox and talk through everything, and Michelle would take a quieter, more objective perspective. And then really, I listened to everything she said because I knew when she was talking, it was important for me to listen.
Well, that's always a good lesson for all of us, actually. So from either one of you, how has this professional partnership enhanced your personal life?
It has encouraged me to try new things, to step outside of my comfort zone, so that we can grow. And we have done the Leaders Edge program together since passing the CPB and the CPP. We got to meet in person in St. Louis at the Leaders Edge conference. And now we're trying to decide what our next big adventure is together, how we can do more with NIGP and grow our profession.
Yeah, that next best step is always important to recognize, isn't it? And I know, Tanya, you've already taken one of those steps, haven't you?
I have. I'm a member of the Leadership Development Committee with NIGP, and just started my new 3-year appointment. So I understand the value of giving back and the real great partnerships of all of the community of public procurement professionals.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. So I want to really take the time to thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you, Keith.
And we're just about out of time, so I want to thank everybody for watching as well and taking the time to chat with you two on Way to Grow. And as always, I want to remind everybody that you can find the NIGP mentorship page and program, as well as our mentorship Facebook page at www.nigp.org/mentorship. So this is Keith Blatz speaking and hoping that you'll join me here on Radio NIGP for our next segment of Way to Grow, and reminding you that this is Radio NIGP.
As managers, how do we continue to lead our teams as we navigate real-life adversities that actually impact the workplace? What are some of these real-life adversities? They could be a natural disaster. I know that some of you actually leave your homes and your families to work for the community and help them get back to normal before you're able to do it for yourself. Maybe it is a newsworthy event. I can not imagine what it was like in Charleston following the shooting that happened there a few years back. But I can tell you that in Columbia, in the aftermath, it was a complete circus. But we still had to go to work every single day, even though it was a very painful experience to watch it all go down. Maybe there's change on your job. A reduction in force can really, really impact your teams, as everyone is wondering, am I going to lose my job? And the rumor mill is just grinding out. Or maybe there's a change in leadership. When an entity head, such as a mayor, a superintendent, or president of a university, when they leave, everyone starts wondering what's going to happen to me, because there's going to be some change in the cabinet. And you know, sometimes it's hard to help someone, an individual on your team, when they are suffering a grief or a loss. But what happens when you lose someone on the team, and now through your own hurt, you have to navigate or lead your team through the loss of a coworker? And every day, there's stress and there's mental illness brought about by the news, social media, other factors that we absolutely have no idea that's going on in people's homes. How in the world do you get through it? As a manager, it's your contractual duty to lead your teams in the most positive way possible. As a leader, it's an inherent duty. The good news for all of us is that we have a wonderful network of professionals who are always willing to help, whether it be to throw resources our way, a lending ear, or even just I went through this and this is how I got through it. Make sure that you tap into your resources, because that's what we're here for. So stay with us, as next month we are preparing a wonderful August show which will celebrate real life procurement heroes as we prepare to meet at NIGP's forum in Louisville. We'll actually get to sit and discuss award winners and what this experience is like for them. I'm so looking forward to it. And I hope to see you there. In the meantime, stay safe and remember, tap into your resources.
We'll keep talking. I don't know what else to talk about, but I mean, we are recording, and
yeah, if
anyone wants to steal any, I do think we could talk about these things forever. Like,
yeah, it's an interesting what he said. You know, and like with the supervisor that I just mentioned in that last story, I had enormous respect for this guy before this incident, and I had even more afterwards.
But the in between.
Well, that it was, you know, it was one 2-minute thing on that particular day, and it was a very expensive a piece of material I was working on, and that's what got him upset, because you got to start all over, you know, and it's a process of putting pieces of metal together, but you know, there's so many people I've worked for over the years that I've often told my wife that if so and so called me to work on a project, I drop everything I was doing and go work on a project with them. And I'm sure I've seen them fail. I've seen them apologize for things, and they were, you know, department heads. And I think that it's one thing that bugs me about a particular individual in this country who's never wrong and never apologizes for anything. I'm sure if he bumped into somebody in a shopping center, he wouldn't apologize for it. And that just, you know, grates on me, because all of us make mistakes, and all of us should be willing to say, I'm sorry, I didn't intend, like you said, I didn't intend to hurt
I
you.
think the interesting thing when you're just talking feedback, though, is things could have gone differently. And I've been in the position of the supervisor that feels like I've had to eat my words, and maybe not my words, because that's the weird dynamic is the coaching.
Right.
The coaching there is not necessarily what's wrong. It's the approach that was wrong. And so I don't want to apologize for what I said, but I want to apologize for how and where I said it.
How exactly.
And if in your particular situation, you had a ton of respect for this individual, they belittled you, and when you went home that night, you might have still had respect for them, but you might have had a worse feeling, or maybe I don't want to work for this guy, and if you'd come back the next day and it had never been addressed, that kind of stuff festers, and that's where you do lose respect for your leadership. That's where you feel like there's a toxic work culture. And so to me, that's the importance of owning your mistakes. And again, the mistake is the approach. The mistake is not the feedback. Like the feedback, if you peel the layers away, the feedback was, oh, you shouldn't have acted on this, or you should have checked your understanding, or whatever it might be. It was the delivery of the feedback that was wrong.
Right.
And so those
sometimes that can lose, you can lose the whole, you can lose the whole message.
Yes. But the ability to come back in a timely manner and correct that not only corrected your perception of that individual, but like you said, you gained more respect. And even the people on the outside looking in, he doesn't have, my supervisors don't have to be critical of me. If they're critical of someone in front of me and then I don't ever see them correct it, I'm just like, ooh, I wouldn't want to make them mad. I wouldn't want to upset them. But I think and this is why I'm like, gosh, we could have talked about this forever. Another dynamic, and it's something that I've had to learn, or I guess accept sort of recently in my role with coaching privately and providing praise publicly. There are certain individuals that I get frustrated with at work, and rightfully so. And I go to my supervisor and say, here's what's going on. You need to be aware of it. You know, as a department director, we are expected to work out as much as we can on our own. So if I'm bringing it to the county manager, it's because I no longer feel like I have the power to deal with it. And yet I don't ever see anything happen. And I've had to remind myself that I shouldn't see anything happen. Hopefully what I should see is change behavior, but I can't assume that the person I went to isn't taking action on what I shared with them because I'm not seeing it, because I wouldn't want them to ridicule me publicly. I wouldn't want them to bring me in and publicly say, Tara, you screwed this up. And so those are those weird dynamics too. And especially again, as a supervisor, my staff might not think I'm aware of things or addressing things because I am addressing it privately. And so there's all these weird dynamics that happen in feedback. And I think even just coaching our people in that way, when people come to you and say, I'm struggling with this thing or this person, I think sometimes we have to make it very clear that I will deal with it. I will address it. And you don't need to know how I'm going to address it. And it won't be publicly. But it does make a dynamic weird because you see people getting praised all the time, and yet you don't see them being corrected. And you just have to trust the person in that role.
We wouldn't want it. We wouldn't want it for ourselves.
Exactly. But it does make things weird when you're frustrated with someone and all you ever see is the good things that they get called out for, and you're like, oh man, but what about all those other things? I have to remind myself,
when is this guy
I wouldn't want that done publicly either. So anyways,
when's this guy going to get clobbered upside down?
Yes.
And I think there's a movie I saw a snippet of the other day when John Candy in the movie Stripes, and he talked about swallowing a lot of aggression. And I think as supervisors, we wind up doing that, because we give our bosses the good, the bad, and the ugly, the A recommendation and the B recommendation, which one is our final choice. And sometimes they choose the one that we didn't recommend, and you have to resist the temptation later on when it doesn't work to say, I told you so. And so you wind up taking some Tums or something else because you knew what was going to happen. I mean, it's not that we have crystal balls or anything, but I'm sure you you've seen situations at work, you're like, why are they doing it this way? You know, this is not going to work, and here's why. A true story from our state association. My immediate president, when I was vice president, after our terms, we would go to board meetings because you're on the board for life unless you walk away. And somebody 5, 6 years after our term, somebody would bring up something at a board meeting, and we'd turn and look at each other, and one of us would say, well, do you want to take this one or do you want me to take it? And we put our hand up to be called on by the president. We'd say, excuse me, but we tried this about 10 years ago, and here is what happened. So just so you know, that this isn't some new idea, that this and I know sometimes it's not the right time for an idea. That's fine. You don't have the resources, manpower, whatever it is, the climate isn't right. But to bring back something that you've already tried and invested resources in, and it didn't work, and now you're going to do it again. And we felt as past presidents an obligation to say, excuse me.
And I think even in that situation, it's recognizing why the feedback's valuable, because the hope is that you can share, here's what we tried, it didn't work, and we think it didn't work for these reasons.
Right.
And if those reasons don't exist anymore, it might be worth trying, but I felt like I had to share with you that we've done it and it hasn't worked out. Or if those reasons still exist, we just don't want you to waste time or effort on something if that climate hasn't changed. Whatever we believe caused it to fail at the time is still existing, then that's why I'm cautioning you. If it doesn't exist, then I'm going to caution you that we've attempted it before. Here were the pitfalls that derailed it. Be aware of them so you don't end up in the same spot if you move forward with this. So,
and I think that's something that just comes with time and experience and feeling comfortable in your own skin. I would rather be called on the carpet for having overstepped my bounds than to let my boss or my agency walk into a landmine, and I can deal with that. I probably earlier in my career I would not have done that, but as I got older and I got more responsibility dumped on me, I'm like, this is crazy. I'm being paid for X amount of knowledge and experience that I've attained over the years. If I'm not willing to share it, regardless of the consequences, then what's the point? And that's not something everybody comes to, and I'm
but
sure
the other
you
piece
have.
of having that experience is knowing how to share it and knowing, I mean, it's even things, if you've seen enough projects from like a procurement standpoint, I've seen enough projects where I'm like, I'm not an engineer. I'm not an expert in this particular area, but as we're talking through a problem, I'm fine saying I may be the stupid non-engineer in the room, but I'm not willing to walk away from this without asking this question. My question may be totally off base, but it might start the conversation that helps solve the problem. And I wish Kevin were still on the call. I think all of it comes back to the humility. It's the humility to say, I screwed up. It's the humility to say, I'm not the subject matter expert here, but my brain is saying I have to ask this question, even if it makes me look dumb. It's the humility to say, even if you're mad at me, I'm going to share this, not because my ego's involved and I need you to take my recommendation, but because I can't live with myself if I don't share it with you.
Exactly.
The piece we couldn't talk through because we ran out of time, and I wish maybe at some other future point we can talk about it, is receiving feedback as a higher level position. Because I think there's a weird, and I haven't figured it out yet, but I try to have regular meetings with my staff. I tell them all the time, I'm not going to get better if you don't share your feedback with me. But because of that title, because of that voice, people aren't comfortable being critical of their boss. They don't feel like it's safe. And I don't know how many ways I can say, like, I can't do better if you don't tell me where I'm messing up. I'm not going to say that your suggestion is going to be taken, but I hope people realize that I will hear it, and there might be reasons I can't do what they want me to do, but just being able to have the conversation is so important. And that's a piece, I don't know how you get there, but.
Well, I think in my example that I gave with counseling supervisors, you have to hope that at least one of your employees is willing to say something to you. That's all it takes is one. Because if you're not hearing anything, that's not good.
There is a problem.
If you know, so if let's say you have 20 people working for you, the idea that you're going to get feedback from 20 of those people is unrealistic. All you need is one of them to be courageous enough and feel enough of a connection to you. And I don't mean from a friendship standpoint or anything else, that they feel confident enough in their position and in their relationship with you that they can close the door and say, excuse me, what you just said in this staff meeting isn't going to fly, and here's why. And that's so, you just need one.
Yeah.
I think that's important. And because I think people come to their own confidence level with giving feedback and dealing with fear of supervisors, fear of retribution, fear of I never worried about getting a letter of reprimand in my file. I've got several of them. And yet here I am, I never worried about that stuff. I don't know. Maybe I got lucky. I really felt like they deserved my professional opinion of a situation. If they didn't want to take my advice, fine.
Well, maybe it's sort of a case of the boy who cries wolf. Like,
yeah,
if every time you didn't like something, you spoke up and said, no, this is wrong. You can't do it this way.
Right.
So you're
Yeah.
defending yourself.
No,
you're defending.
You have to be on solid
position.
ground.
But if you've got a solid reason and you've proven time and again, I had to share this feedback with you because I saw us going down a critical path that we probably don't want to go down. That's, I guess, how you prove yourself in the end. So I don't know. It's just interesting to think through.
It is. It's
because the person who complains all the time.
Conversations like this, I wish I would have had when I was first starting out in the military, but I probably would have sat there and said, what? Like, what do you mean? How do you get from here to here in that kind of, it's like the old joke about, asking somebody for a date in high school. Oh, just be yourself. What? What does that mean? And then
I don't know who myself is yet.
Yeah, I don't know who myself is. I don't even know what I want to do. I mean, it always amazed me. These kids knew what they were going to do when they got out of college, and I was fumbling around in the dark. Hats off to them. But anyway, and you listen. I think if people listen to this out there, if you take one little thing out of it, sometimes that's all you got to hear. Like, oh yeah, I could see how that would work. And you can disregard the rest of the conversation, but all you need is one little tidbit that you can work with, and you're off and running sometimes, I think.
I think you have to be open to listening.
Yes.
But in the same way, listening to feedback from others is kind of like critical thinking. Like, also consider your source. Be open to criticism, be open to feedback, but don't take criticism from someone who you
wouldn't take advice from. God, we could talk about that for hours.
Don't internalize it. But
some people complain about it.
I was just going to say, just you sharing with me the idea of like, I mean, I've got a small staff, and until this conversation, it was like, I want in every one of my one-on-one meetings, them to be able to give me critical feedback. Here's what you can do better. And I tell people all the time, I do better with criticism than I do praise. Because what do I do with praise? Like, okay, thank you, but I can't get better from praise. And so I would much rather have constructive criticism than praise. I'm learning to accept praise, but my expectation before this conversation was, no, I want everyone to be able to share with me critical feedback. But the reality is, if everyone was always sharing with me critical feedback on my staff, I'd be like, these ungrateful people, like, do they not see how hard I'm working? Do they not
be careful? Be careful when
Yes.
you ask for.
And instead, so you do have the frequent complainers, and everyone knows who the frequent complainers are, and they do get the attention they need. And sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the oil, but everybody knows, oh, that's so and so, and they're just going to complain until they get their way. And the reason the squeaky wheel gets the oil is because they just want to shut it up. But yet the people who come with real valuable advice, they may not get the oil. They might get a whole new like wheel system. It might be like, oh yes, that's really broken. We need to fix it. We don't need to just appease it. We need to fix it, because sometimes there's power in the voice that doesn't speak up all the time. If anyone listens to this, I'm going to give Don a big head, but to me, that's Don Buffum. Like, Don Buffum often seems like this quiet person and he's taking everything in. But when Don speaks, you listen, because you know that he doesn't take the time to speak unless he's really got something to say.
Yeah, he reminds me of those E.F. Hutton commercials, And we had a couple of guys in our chapter like that they'd sit in the back of the room and people would be going back and forth, and all of a sudden their hand would go up. Kirk is like that.
Yeah.
I've seen Kirk shut down an argument in a room full of 200 people at a FAPO business meeting. And just by the power of his way of delivery, the position he holds, the respect he has in the profession, and he lays out a case sort of like an attorney and says, well, yeah, what these people are saying over here, but here's the problem with that. And then what these people are saying over here's the problem. Maybe we need to go here. And the room is just silent. And we had a chapter president named Herb that used to do that too.
Sometimes I think it's the ability to take in all of the information before you speak.
Yeah.
I've gotten better about it, but I used to be my brain is firing fast, and so I want to speak fast and get it out. I feel like I've gotten better as people are talking. Like, my struggle is I have to jot down notes because I don't want to forget the thought. But someone like Don, someone like Kirk, they have this uncanny ability to listen to all the arguments, formulate the thought, and then when they speak, it's like you've covered everything and you found a way. There's multiple times in board meetings or other situations with Don where once he said it, I'm like, gosh, I've been trying to say that for 10 minutes, Don, and you just got it out in a minute and a half and everybody understands you. And the thing I've been trying to explain for 10 minutes, nobody was understanding. And so I don't know. It's just interesting that I think the people that sometimes stay silent are the ones that they're being silent because they're listening, but also if they don't speak that much, their voice has a certain weight because people know.
Yeah, it has more merit.